have never done this before. And so they want it to be a certain way. And the truth is that it's way harder than they ever expected. So whether the multiple is 3 times or 4 times, it's going to cost more than you think it is, no matter what number you put down on a piece of paper. And it's going to take longer, and you're going to have unanticipated problems that you, no matter how hard you try to anticipate them, you will not catch them.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Running a business is hard, but changing business at each inflection point could be harder. You need changes in people, process, and technology to enable the growth at each inflection point. But the hardest change management project that any organization can ever undertake is the ERP implementation, as the ERP implementation touches every discipline possible in the entire company. And regardless of how many times you have done it, you will still get surprises. But the more implementations you have under your belt, the easier the process becomes. In today's episode, our guest, Buddy Blattner, discusses how CFOs can be successful with an ERP implementation. He also discusses how to plan for operational capacity during a growth inflection point, including an ERP implementation. Finally, he discusses several stories related to ERP rescues and the lessons learned from each of these stories. Let me introduce Buddy to you. Buddy started consulting full-time in April 2018 after 37 years working in sales, strategic planning, product management, CFO, COO, CEO, and CEO or entrepreneur. While Buddy has spent most of his career in COO and CEO roles, he considers his profession to be Chief Financial Officer. Buddy's company experience size has ranged from startups to more than $250 million in sales. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey, Buddy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Can't wait to talk.
Yeah, this is going to be so much fun because obviously the kind of life that you have lived in the ERP world, I know that you don't like to live that anymore, but obviously there are going to be a lot of lessons learned for our audience. Just to kick things off, if people don't know you, do you want to start with your personal story as well as your current focus, Buddy?
I'll do the best I can to keep it short. So in the last 40 years, I've had direct sales jobs. I was head of corporate strategic planning for Pacific Telephone. I wrote their first 2 business plans in the early 80s. I pivoted to manufacturing, and for 13 years, I made small rolls for business machines. We took big rolls of paper and cut them into little rolls of paper. That business quadrupled in size while I was there. Oh, wow. I went from 150 employees to over 700 employees. I went out on my own after that and joined a company that made the Arctic Zone brand of lunchboxes and coolers, and I took care of the business side. We tripled the size of that business in 2 years. We sold it to a private equity firm who combined us with 2 other portfolio companies of theirs, about a $250 million a year in sales enterprise. After 4 years doing that, I was lucky enough to get involved in a company that I ultimately owned that bought small parts overseas, brought them to the U.S. and sold them to large OEMs. So that was my own company, and I had that until 5 years ago, and now I've been consulting for that time with small and medium-sized businesses in manufacturing, distribution, construction, and services.
That is so awesome. And I think there are going to be a lot of different stories. And personally, what I am really interested in knowing that formula of growth that you have figured out, I guess by now, after seeing so much, and I don't know, what your belief is going to be overall, what works, what does not work. So we'll do a deep dive into that. Before we do that, we have one of these standard questions that we ask every single guest. In your case, it's almost funny, to be honest, to ask this question because that's what you have been doing. But we ask, okay, what is your perspective on business growth?
I learned a long time ago, if you don't grow the business, you don't have a business that will be a good long-term business. And what happens a lot of times is that a company gets growing quickly because their entrepreneur has a really good sense of what the market is, or they've developed a good product or whatever. My personal experience is never put the brakes on no matter what's happening. Because once you put the brakes on, it's really, really hard to get that revved up feeling that you have.
Yeah. Could not agree more. I think that's a great perspective. And I am going to be sharing some stories from my perspective based on what I see. And I don't know if you share the same perspective or not. I would love to hear your insights on it, especially when you talk about manufacturer, distributor, and obviously you have spent a ton of time. Okay, I talk to my friends and they're like, you know what? I am not accepting any more business. And I'm like, what? In their case, they are not accepting any sort of new sales because they don't want. And I'm like, that's crazy. Because most businesses, as far as I know, they want as much growth as possible. That's the foundation of any business, right? So typically in my mind, either they are too afraid of running too fast because they don't have confidence on their operational processes, the way they are set up. And that's probably the reason why they are claiming that they don't want growth. Some people that we have interviewed, and obviously they had very similar background as you, they like to call this as more of the inflection points, and we'll be touching on that as well overall from the growth journey. So when you look at the first inflection point, these guys like to define this as more of the lifestyle business. I don't know if you have heard of that term before, but that's going to be, really entrepreneur-run businesses. Typically, this problem happens in that space. Once it is run by a savvy CFO, obviously, or a private equity, then it's a different ballgame. So typically in that lifestyle business, I see this problem. So again, going back to, the comment about the whole growth thing, but then you have this mindset from these owners. So let's say if you were to review these businesses, I don't know if you're going to have any sort of advice for them, insight in terms of are they doing the right thing, not doing the right thing. So tell me what your perspective is overall in this commentary.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but I will I will basically say there's a part of me that says you have to be like a shark. If a shark stops moving, it dies. And I think businesses are that way. The problem that you have, especially with lifestyle businesses, is that most of the times the entrepreneur has figured out how to make a living, a nice living for his family and his friends, and maybe some key employees. And that's good enough, right? He gets to play golf twice a week. He gets to go to whatever restaurant he wants to. They go on 2-week vacations. They take their kids skiing, whatever it is. And that seems to be okay. There's a place for that. Also, business is hard, right? Let's say that I think I'm good at it. It's still even hard for me. And so when business is hard, and then you layer on the kind of change that's required to make a business grow, hiring new people, adding new departments, doing things you don't understand, doing things that you're scared of. Those are not easy things to do. And that's why I call them hard, but you have to do the hard things. And honestly, the older I get and the more experienced I get, I look back at some of the things that I did in my 20s and my 30s, and I say, I'd never do that now. You get risk averse. The more success you have, sometimes people get even more risk averse.
Yeah, so we are actually going to go back and talk about those mistakes, to be honest. I mean, they are the best learning lessons for anybody, right? So maybe, I don't know if you're going to have any sort of stories and maybe talk about the growth stories of these companies. I know that you had successful results, but there must be some sort of, twist and turns along the way, right? Say if you were to go back and pick a couple of stories, what you would do differently overall from the growth perspective of those companies.
My favorite growth story is the second company I worked for after Pacific, or first company I worked for after Pacific Telephone was a company called Rittenhouse Paper Company, where my dad and his partner were the principals. And they had grown the business together from $6 million to $30 million when I joined the company. They had bought it in a leveraged buyout, but they knew that they had a growth engine that was fantastic. And I had been the CFO for about a year when we were doing about $60 million a year. And my dad called me and he goes, get ready, we're going to do $100 million next. And I said, okay. I was the CFO. I said, I was the CFO, but also sort of like the sort of assistant COO. So I sort of said, okay, well, we're going to need an HR manager, a logistics manager, an inventory manager, a controller for this division, et cetera. I'm going to need about $300,000 to hire people because I knew what that entailed, right? You can't just make more paper rolls and ship them. You need to think about all the things that go through it. And so I was the planner guy. So we created job descriptions. We hired people. We put them in place. And at the end of the year, we didn't exactly hit 100 million. Maybe we hit 90. So we went from 65 to 90, not 65 to 100. And my dad called me, and it's still not bad, but he called me and he said, we're overstaffed. And I said, the forecast said 100 million. I prepared for 100 million. So, so the point that I'm making is that, you know, the job of the implementers, the job of the entrepreneurs is to set the target. The job of the implementers is to do whatever they can to make the target. I was not yet the sales guy. I was the operating guy. And so I did all the things that operating guys do. The problem is that we spent, you know, a couple $100,000 more than we would have if we would have done 90 million. And that comes right out of your pocket. And the learning experience for me was sometimes you have to be aggressive going forward. And sometimes you have to pull that aggression back a little bit as the CFO and say, maybe we're not going to make it. And if we don't, what's the risk? And I didn't calculate any of that. I just said, he says 100, I'm building for 100. Now, when an entrepreneur tells me we're going to go up 25% next year, my internal gut tells me, let's build the plan for 20.
Exactly.
So that's my favorite growth story.
Yeah, so very interesting. And obviously, I need to do a lot of unpacking there, okay? And obviously, you can probably talk about the other stories as well if you have anything where you were slightly more conservative. Sure. And I completely agree, to be honest. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I would never plan this way because, you know, there is one thing that is never going to be guaranteed is sales, okay? In fact, you might be at 60, you might go to 40, who knows? You know, and if you are going to be spending the way a $100 million company is spending, you know, it could fire back pretty bad, to be honest. In your case, you probably got lucky by investing so much. It's very, 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 very hard to forecast that growth. So overall, let's say if you were to provide some more colors there in terms of the detailed planning, what should these entrepreneurs be looking at when they are trying their own growth stories? And I hear this on a daily basis, okay? Even my competitors, they are saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to do 5X in next 5. And I'm like, you don't even make a single cold call in your day, okay? You have no way of building your pipeline. How are you going to do 5X, right? Because you don't have a predictable pipeline. You are not putting enough effort to be able to get there. This is just a dream or a wish. So let's say if you were to sort of create the structured plan from the sales perspective, number one, I mean, that's always going to be the driver, right? Then operations, sure, you can figure it out, but obviously sales is going to be a big deal. So overall, how would you plan this? I mean, are you going to simply pick a percentage and then sort of plan the sales as well as this? Or are you going to look at each and every account and going to look at the confidence, okay, how this is going to work, and finally figure out the operational plan from there? How would you approach this?
So I always use some version of an end of the year planning tool. So the first step is to figure out what you're going to end this year at, right? So let's say that you start your planning process in October. You know what your results are through September, and you have to then estimate October, November, and December to get a year-end number, because you cannot create anything going forward until you have an idea of how you're going to finish. So first thing you do is create a year-end forecast, and that, from a CFO perspective, that means creating a pro forma income statement and a pro forma balance sheet. Then the next step, if I were the CFO or the COO of a, let's say, a privately held company, right? I would say, okay, let's make a sales budget. And you can do it a bunch of different ways depending on what kind of business you're in. So in some businesses, you don't have the same clients over and over. So if you're an electrical contracting company and you are doing the blank hotel, right? You're going to build the hotel once. For that general contractor, right? So that your general contractor you may do 5 projects for that general contractor, but they're not repeatable. So
I agree.
you have to look at each company individually and say, how do I figure out how that company is going to grow? So the company says we did 20 million this year, we want to do 25 next year.
Yeah.
The spread's 5, but of that 20, do you have to recreate all 20 million every time?
Yeah.
So in the services business, you might need new clients. In the services business, you might have recurring revenue that you know.
Yeah.
You have to bottoms up in almost every case, each one. So in the company that I owned, we were able, because we had basically the same product being sold over and over and over again, we'd look at the product life cycle of the products we were selling, the customers that were buying them, and we forecasted by product by customer for our key accounts. And that would be the way we would come up with our sales forecast. And to go back to your point about growth, not to interrupt this, but in 2008, I had the small parts company that was selling small parts to household and consumer product OEMs.
Yeah.
At the time, for a major maker of garage door openers, before the revenue crash, we made 17,000 garage door openers a day. When the middle of the recession hit, we were at 10,000 garage door openers a day. So to your point earlier, you don't always get to grow. Sometimes the market tells you what you're doing. So we had to endure a 45% drop in units, for which my sales, marketing, operations, purchasing teams did absolutely nothing wrong. We never had a rejection. We never missed a ship date. But we went from, let's call it, for the sake of argument, 10 million to $6.5 million in sales with that account overnight. And we had to make up for that. We had to figure out how we were going to deal with that. So to go back to your point about growth, it's not guaranteed. And there are exigent circumstances that can happen to you that have nothing to do with what your company does. It took 5 years to get all that business back. Some of it never comes back, right? You have to go get new accounts. You have to go find another industry to be in. All of a sudden we're making parts for brakes. We've been making windows and doors and, stuff like that. And now we're making brakes. So you start with your sales forecast. And the second thing you do is then once you know what your sales forecast is, you create your cost of goods. And your cost of goods in the services business is people, right? And your cost of goods in the electrical contracting business is material and labor and indirect labor. Or if you're making sheet metal, it's direct labor and a little bit of overhead. You got to figure all those things out. And that gives you the amount of money that you have to spend, right? And that's what operating expenses is, how much money you have to spend. So so after I sold my company, I worked with some young guys who were building a fastener manufacturing company. And they thought that the future was endless for them. They had found a sweet spot in the market. And when I joined them, they were doing $3 million in sales and not making a dime. I showed them some business techniques. We started to make money. We doubled the size of the company. We tripled the size of the company. Now the company is 7 times bigger than when I first started working with them. But I remember saying to the VP of sales, if you can do this amount of sales, there's no way you can spend this much money on the operating side. And that was the eye opener to them, right? Is size. Boy, this is bad. Size matters, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. Love these stories, to be honest. I mean, they're super insightful, and obviously we can learn a lot from these stories as well, right? So the next layer that I'm going to bring in is going to be obviously from the CFO's perspective, and we are always working with the CFOs. And buddy, I mean, you have been in this space for a very long time. You have people who are sort of starting in their career and they don't really understand, what they are getting into and what kind of mistakes that they are making. And we have all made mistakes, 20 years back, I guess, right? So one of the challenges that we all get, when I'm talking to some newer CFOs, and, for them, I'll give you one instance of, we were sort of calling these customers. And at that time, I think I was selling SAP. So, we were sort of talking to the CFOs, and obviously these guys had really bad experiences with SAP for whatever reason. There could be million variables, right? I don't know.
I've heard that.
Right? So obviously, and you talk about this, that, anytime you are going to be implementing an ERP, then you are looking for this whole 3-year hell, which is very, very, very hard to forecast. And especially when you're living in market conditions such as today, or the one that you mentioned, right? It gets really tricky to, number one, forecast your sales. Then obviously you have to manage everything else. And then finally you throw another curveball called ERP implementation. And then good luck in managing your financials. It's going to be really hard, right? So the CFO, the story is that, when I was talking to him and he's like, okay, SAP, you're trying to sell me SAP. I never want SAP in my life. I am super happy with QuickBooks. Okay. So now there's not much of a comparison to be, okay, because QuickBooks is a wild, wild west. You don't really have the same capabilities that you're going to get with the ERP, especially when you talk about manufacturing centric. You are probably require far tighter financial control because you are going to have 15 different systems. Good luck in managing it. I don't know how you are going to do that. So let's say if you were to sort of give any sort of advice to these CFOs who are starting in their career and they don't necessarily understand the different ERP systems or financial planning or the operational planning using systems, what advice would you have for them?
So about 80% of the customers in my practice use either QuickBooks or Sage. And QuickBooks is much larger than Sage from the amount of people that use it that I run into.
Right. Yeah.
What I tell people about QuickBooks is this is a perfectly acceptable way to do bookkeeping and small accounting businesses. And we can create a few reports for you, but it only does a very limited amount of stuff. So if you want to grow your business and you want to report on your business and you want to understand where the bodies are buried in your business, you need to do something more sophisticated than that. And sophistication means pain. It is absolutely painful. Implementing an ERP system or an MRP system or even a more sophisticated financial modeling system all requires a lot of thought, a lot of work. And it's different than, and it's a lot more detail than what happens in a QuickBooks system. So, for example, one of my clients right now is a sheet metal manufacturing company. They're growing very, very quickly. When I joined the company a year ago, they weren't doing regular inventories. They weren't allocating labor to cost of goods sold. They didn't have an overhead account. So the first step is just to estimate, right? And check to see if you're doing it right. And so we started counting our inventory every month. We started to say, here are the 100 employees that are in the manufacturing plant. Which ones are making what? Is this a direct guy or is an indirect guy? Does this guy carry the material over to the machine or does he actually pull the lever on the machine? Just to start to get some ideas, because while we're going to keep using QuickBooks, we are trying to use QuickBooks in a way that gets people to understand what the process is going to be going forward. Because what happens is entrepreneurs get freaked out by how much work it is to implement every single transaction along the way. When something moves from the plasma table to the bending area, from the bending area to the building area, from the building area to the welding area, from the welding area to the QC area, to the shipping and receiving area, every single one of those transactions has to be recorded along the way in an ERP or an MRP environment. And that is not something that, small to medium-sized companies are used to doing.
Exactly. And I love those examples, to be honest. And I'm probably going to give you one more example, and probably you are going to find this funny as well. Okay. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you are going to have some sort of advice for them as well. Okay. So this morning's story, and we get all sort of arguments, and you know this, and we have already discussed this, that, ERP implementation, very, very, very long time to really calibrate, to optimize, to get the business results from ERP. It's not just as simple as just put your items, put your customer, and that's it. The job is going to be done, right? It doesn't work that way. So this morning story, this guy is trying to win the deal, and obviously a lot of ERP, salespeople come to us because obviously we know a lot about the space, right? So this guy is trying to win the deal, and he's like, okay, I have quoted my implementation fee of 55,000, 60,000, for an ERP. They are probably doing roughly 200 projects. They are in more of the construction manufacturing space, I would say. And, so they are not necessarily the manufacturer, but more of the project manufacturing is what they are. So 200-ish project, I would guess that they are probably 10, 15-ish million. That's probably going to be my guess, right? So these guys, are trying to get the taste of the ERP. They are shopping around. Obviously, there are many variety of ERP. Some are going to be simply the add-ons that are going to sit on top of QuickBooks, going to claim that, we are ERP, but you know how this works. They are never going to get the same results that they are going to get with the real integrated ERP. So this guy quoted, and I'm like, okay, and I am actually trying to protect him because, obviously he's not going to make any money. Even if you're running ERP business, why would you want to get into a project where you are going to be losing money? Your client is probably going to fail. What's the point of all of this? The client is saying, and you are probably going to laugh at this, okay? The client is saying the implementation fee is too much. Okay, I was hoping that we can implement this in $5,000. Can you believe this?
Keep repeating that and say insane.
How many hours are we talking about? Okay. And there are some companies in the market, buddy. Okay. They are going to claim that they can implement in $5,000, $20,000, $30,000. You tell me, why is it so hard to implement an ERP? Why does it take forever? What is required to implement an ERP? You tell me, because probably I don't know enough.
Well, yeah, I think you know just fine. I would say I go back and look at this in the context of a conversation I had after I'd left my family company. My dad's partner came down to visit me at my house in Tucson, and we were walking to the spring training used to be down there, and we're walking to spring training, and he goes, I've got a portfolio company. He was a private equity guy at the time. He goes, I got a portfolio company. They've got a bunch of excess inventory. You know more about excess inventory than I do. Give me an idea how long this is going to take. And I said, Andy, you know exactly how long it's going to take. So you write that number down, and it's going to take it's going to cost twice as much and take twice as long.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the right way to do it.
ERP is not a multiple of 2. It's a multiple of 3 or 4 or 5. Yeah, and it's not that, guys like Sam exist and they can help you, but most entrepreneurs or even sophisticated small business people have never done this before. And so they want it to be a certain way. And the truth is that it's way harder than they ever expected. So whether the multiple is 3 times or 4 times, it's going to cost more than you think it is, no matter what number you put down on a piece of paper. And it's going to take longer, and you're going to have unanticipated problems that no matter how hard you try to anticipate them, you will not catch them.
Yeah, and honestly speaking, buddy, and you can tell me if I'm off here, to be honest, okay? The challenge that I have with this argument is, when I look at these entrepreneurs, is who are you hurting? You are only hurting yourself. Why not believing in the reality? So let's say, even if I get in a deal and I'm going to say, you know what? Okay, it is going to take $10,000, $30,000. I have nothing to lose. Okay. Because what I will, typically most of the services companies, the way they work is, they are probably going to be charging on an hour, and they are going to be doing low balling. But who is going to get hurt in this? It's going to be you, who is trying to estimate that this is probably going to be $5,000. When you are building any sort of financial model. And buddy, I don't know. You can tell me how maybe most of the seasoned CFOs, I guess, the way they are going to plan, my perspective would be that they are going to be ultra conservative. Okay, if you say that this is going to cost $1 million, they are probably going to put 5x on top of that, the way you describe. The more, because you are always going to get surprises in the financial model. Nobody can protect you, even if you have planned everything, the way you were telling in the other story, that I had everything figured out, but I had to still pay the price. And that's how the world works, I guess. So any sort of...
Well, there's no benefit to anybody underestimating what it's gonna take, both manpower wise, money wise, process change, orientation, any of that stuff. The problem is that if you are the CEO or the entrepreneur of a very successful small company that needs to grow up, right? Needs to go from adolescent to teenager, or teenager to young adult, or whatever growth period that they're in. They've had a modest amount of success by that time, and think that they are right and you are wrong. And so even though, Sam may have implemented 50 or 100 ERP systems, and maybe 3 cutovers went great and 279 of them went terrible, or some version of not very good. They think that theirs is different. And so I edited a book for one of my clients, and I realized that and it was about change management, and that the most amount of change that a company can go through is to implement an ERP system, because it requires not only starting from scratch in every single thing that you do, but if you mechanize a crappy process, all you're going to have is a mechanized crappy process. And there are
could not agree more.
So many consultants like you, Sam, or others, and I'm not, there's hundreds of them, and some of them are very, very good, but they have seen everything, and they have seen it go good, and they have seen it go not so good. And if you try to modify software to match your bad process, that's all you're going to get is a bad process. So the challenge is to make the entrepreneur or the CEO understand that the company has to change, not them.
Exactly. So, okay, so let's go back to a little bit of, from the CFO perspective. So let's say if I'm the CFO, obviously I don't want to think that this is going to take 3 years. Okay, not in this life, because that's a lot of financial. When you are taking, unless you have $10 million sitting in your backyard, then probably you can take that. But if you talk about $10, $20 million business, it's very hard for them in general. And I can relate with them, to be honest. I mean, if we had to take this project for our own business, I'll be panicking. I'm going to be completely, okay?
Right.
So let's say if you were to sort of advise any sort of clients, when is going to be the point when they should be thinking about taking this risk? How much cash flow should they be keeping? Not only for this variable that you have. I mean, this is probably going to be the biggest variable that you're going to have on your, balance sheet, but then you are planning for your business as well. So obviously you need to plan this along the whole financial model that you're building, let's say for next 5 years. So at what point should they be thinking, and if you have any sort of insight into different inflection point, at what point they should be growing to the next ERP, whether it is going to be good. Let's say if you're $20 million, and I see a lot of mistakes, that $20 million, let's go to SAP, because I know that tomorrow I'm going to be $200 million. And next year I made, and they are now $15 million, and they installed. Now they are asking us, okay, how can we downgrade? Because now I cannot afford to pay SAP this much. So I don't know. I mean, there are many layers there in that.
There's a lot of layers there. So one of the best parts about what I do is that all businesses are the same when you look at them on a piece of paper. And so I can analyze a business very quickly by looking at a balance sheet or an income statement and a little bit of history. But that doesn't tell you about the nuance of the business. So there's probably, to answer your question in the probably most evasive way possible, there's no one size fits all. However, every business knows when they don't have enough information to make their business grow. So if a business stops growing, if a business stops being profitable, if a business doesn't have the capital that it needs to grow to the next level, if a company misses their bank confidence on a regular basis, those are all warning signs that something in your company is wrong. And so when you need more information than you have, then that's a perfect time to think about an ERP system. When the financial reporting aspect of an ERP system doesn't provide you, or of the system that you have doesn't provide you with enough detail, and you're spending all of your money on Excel jockeys rather than on your business so that you can understand what's going on in your business, then it's time for a new system. So there's no one size fits all, but there is commonalities that if you are failing in any way, then it's time to change to something else.
Okay, so I'm actually going to build on that argument a little bit, and I have some interesting stories, from that as well. And, I am trying to find my own answers at times, how can these businesses be so off in their estimation? So when you talk about knowing the information, if you are going to ask any business, they are all going to claim that, I know so much about, okay, but we all know that you don't know enough. Nobody knows. If you knew, then you would not have any sort of challenges in your business. And every single business that I know has some sort of challenges, right? And typically, I like to call this as more of the operational reconciliation. And I think you referred that especially when you are talking about inventory-centric business. If you are simply doing the bookkeeping reporting, then you sort of don't understand what is happening in the business. We see scenarios where, the way your accounting is done, it's completely off from what is happening on the floor. Okay, they have clubbed all of your operations together. You are not really scheduling in as part of your ERP. Your materials are sort of there but not there. So you don't really have insight into the real business. Sure, macro perspective, when you look at the balance sheet, income statement, it's all going to be good. Okay, CFOs are
Yeah.
going to be happy. My ratios are looking good. But here is the scenario. Okay, so I was talking to one guy, and he's like, I had no idea when I was selling the business. I had no idea that I had this 100,000 worth of it in my warehouse. And I'm like, how does that work? Because if you have that in your warehouse, that has to be on financial statements. Okay, how can you miss that? Okay, you are selling a business, you don't have that 100 of inventory. So they are like, you know what? We account for the inventory, but we don't have that inventory in the option process. So we sort of have the inventory, but we don't have the inventory. So, I mean, this is the kind of insight that these businesses don't have, even though they are going to claim that, you know what, I know so much about the business. So I don't know, are you going to have any sort of commentary there from your experience?
Yeah. So every entrepreneur that I've had the pleasure of working with had some gut feel or some formula that they used to understand their business, because
Exactly.
they wouldn't have gotten to the point that they've gotten to without having something like that. So whether it is the cost of material times 3 equals
Yeah.
the selling price, or labor is always 17% of what you're going to sell it for. So figure out how many people it's going to take to make it, divide by 0.17, and that's your selling price.
Yeah.
Every entrepreneur has that. And those
Yeah.
things, I have tried and tried and tried to break those. And usually
Yeah.
a successful entrepreneur has a good system and it works for them. The
Yeah.
problem is it's not scalable.
Exactly.
So when you, so at, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, it's always going to break at some point in
Yep.
time. So
Exactly.
at our family business that grew so fast, at some point in time with 5 plants in the US and 1 plant in Mexico and 1 plant in Canada, one person couldn't keep everything that was going on in their head. And so
Exactly.
it went from, oh my goodness, to we have to have a system, right?
Exactly.
And the
Exactly.
person who had that great idea is talking to you right now, because I didn't know anything about MRP at the time. I just knew that what we were doing wasn't going to work long term. That was
Exactly.
my gut. And so even though our senior VP of manufacturing said to me one time, well, what you're going to do is just put a whole bunch of computer jockeys in front of screens and they're not going to know how to make a paper roll. I said, that's where we're going. It doesn't, you're right. They are not going to know how to make a paper roll the way you and I do. I can
Yeah.
still make a paper roll better than anybody else in the world. That's just because I did it for 40 years in my life.
Yeah.
But from
Yeah.
the perspective of scalability, you have to have a system.
Exactly. And by the way, I mean, see, it's not just the system, I guess. And when I look at my manufacturing friends, to be honest, they're amazing. There's no question about that. Obviously, they built these businesses, so they are phenomenal in general. But at the same time, they don't probably have the formal education, supply chain in the accounting. And I think that's where the real gap is. And this is a real education. You need to have education to be able to make these decisions, to formalize your processes. This is not just, some sort of beliefs or opinions. There is science behind this, right? In terms of how to do that. So unless you have that formal education, whether you are working with a qualified, CFO or somebody who has sort of been there, then only you are going to be making decisions. And typically, when I look at the manufacturing organizations, 20, 25 people, 30 people company, half of them are probably not going to have any education. The people who are going to be in the office, they sort of figured their way out, but they don't really have this sort of approach to scale the business. Do you see similar in your space when you work with your clients, or is your experience different?
Well, it goes back to the concept that we have really, really smart people who have made something work for themselves in this period of time, right? But at the same time, they don't know how to get to the next place by themselves. So even though at family business that I worked at, I knew we needed something, I also needed Sam to help me get there because I had never done it before. And I was surprised every single day. And honestly, I've kept all the 5-ring binder, the 5-inch 3-ring binders with all the processes in them, because it was all new to me. And so what I would say to entrepreneurs is, or small company CEOs or hired guns, whatever, do not be afraid to ask for help, because even getting an MBA or being having a master's in electrical or civil or mechanical engineering or industrial engineering, none of those things is going to help you put in an ERP system. It is a very complicated process. It crosses every single discipline in the company. The fortunate and unfortunate part for the CFO is if you built a Venn diagram around implementing an ERP system, the ERP implementation guy and the CFO are the only people that are in every single bubble. There isn't one thing in doing an ERP system that doesn't involve the CFO.
Exactly. I could not agree more. Yeah, great illustration there. So I don't know if you're going to have any other stories that you would like to share overall from the ERP implementation perspective. I know that you want to share the Mapix one, I guess, and there is the Odoo Rescue one. Do you want to touch on them briefly?
Yeah, so let's talk about the Odoo Rescue, which is really interesting because you mentioned this earlier in the conversation. So this is the fastener manufacturing company that I talked about, and they literally, started with one machine in a garage. Then they bought some more junk. Then they bought a few more pieces, and they went through all of the different job shop kind of systems. And, I'm sure they're on your list of 500, but I couldn't even name them because they all stink, right? But they do the job. They just don't do the whole job, right? And they're homegrown, and it's a family down the street who's doing it. That's all fine. It serves its purpose for every growing company. But then they got entranced by the fact that Odoo was what they call open source, right?
Exactly.
So it looks free. So everybody likes free, right? And then, so it's free. The licenses are a little bit more, but it's free. And then, they get an implementation consultant who says, I can do it for $5,000. And, he does a $5,000 implementation. So then they have Odoo that they have implemented, but they have a $5,000 implementation, which means it doesn't work. Maybe they can build some financials. Maybe they can, do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They can maybe put, do a purchase order or something, but it's not rolling into the inventory and it's not rolling out onto the shop floor. And so when I came in as their fractional CFO, my work partner and I at the time said, well, let's make some phone calls. We found a gold star Odoo implementation consultant and said, we're going to fire the $5,000 guy. We're going to hire this guy. We're going to do a 3-day workshop. We're going to bring them in. And they did a wonderful job in their workshop. At the end of the day, though, the CEO and the CEO/owner was so disgusted with Odoo as it was that it didn't matter whether it had all the right stuff or not.
Right.
Get rid of Odoo, bring in something else. And so even if it's the right thing, if somebody has the wrong feeling about it, it's not going to work.
Exactly.
And so at that time, my now friend, no longer client, but now friend, Robert said, it doesn't really matter whether Odoo's right. It's going to be so hard to change the way people feel about it that you have to find something else. And so rescue ones, I've seen it both sides. I've been involved in a rescue that worked, and I've been in a rescue where we went the other way. So the cannabis factory in Los Angeles, we were brought in to do an Odoo rescue, and we were doing implementations across divisions within 2 months because some of the guys just didn't know how to do it. So teach them how to do it, and all of a sudden it works just fine. Hey, this is great. Thanks. How'd you do that? Right? And so those things happen, right? But we're going back to the Mapix example, which those of us who have some experience can have. We picked Mapix XP with the help of EDS for this business that had 5 locations in the U.S., 1 in Canada, 1 in Mexico. We got the right kind of help. We hired a project leader. We hired project managers within the company. Each plant had their own person on the team. We had team meetings, et cetera. We did the implementation sort of as well as we could. We pushed off the implementation a year while we got our act together. It wasn't, of course, the same plan. It cost twice as much, took twice as long. We implemented it exactly the way we were supposed to. Guess what? In 1990, MRP systems didn't actually work. They had all the thought behind them, but all the apps inside didn't connect, right? So if you had purchases payable, that didn't work, right? What they call it, PO payables. What else do they call it? Where you bring the inventory in and you don't have the invoice yet. and it has to go in inventory, but you don't have the invoice, you can't put it in AP. It had those kind of bumps in the road. The financials didn't roll up exactly the way they did. Excel wasn't as sophisticated then as it was now, so you couldn't do a SQL query to pull out the information that you needed. So much more manual than you ever expected. Today, when we look at, the universe of NetSuite or SAP or whatever, here's what you can be counted on. Excuse me. I was going to say something really bad. The stuff works. So it's always now an implementation issue, not a software issue.
Exactly.
The software works. It connects. It creates the reports. You can use Excel to go get data in your SQL database. And if you're not on SQL, you're on something else, and we can figure out how to get that for you. But that's the sort of like that's where the white hair comes from, is back when it didn't work.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, this is so much fun. I can go for the whole day talking to you, and I can still learn something. Buddy, thank you so much. I think that's it for today.
You're welcome.
Do you have any last minute closing advice for our listeners?
I would say, and I'm not saying this because you're having me as my guest, every CFO, every CEO, anybody who's listening to this, get some professional help. Yeah. This is not something you can do on your own. And if you think you can, you can't. I'm sorry. It's just it's what 40 years of doing it helps you get to. So that would be get professional help, please.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, buddy, for your time and insights today. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be that it takes a long time to understand and figure out these trends once you have seen enough. So don't make the same mistakes that other people have already. At least listen to them, what they are talking about. You might feel that there are some shiny objects and there are easier way of doing. No, ERP implementations are never going to change, even if we are going to be talking about this in next 100 years. That's my prediction. On that note, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Good to see you.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Buddy or his work, or need help with your small to medium-sized business, feel free to email him on blattner@glsbonline.com. It's Blattner at glsonline.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Brian Goffenberg from Vital Hub, who discusses the difference between accounting for a public and private company. Also, the interview with Jim Downs, who shares his insights into the importance of tracking meaningful financial KPIs to improve profitability and growth for CPG companies. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to get you on the next episode of the WBS.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.